Hey everybody, you're listening to the Vocal Advancement Podcast, and I am your host Tom, joined by the lovely Heather as always.
Como está?
Oh, well, where in the world is that today?
Well, that is well, it's not Filipino, is it? It's Tagalog. That's the language that is spoken in the Philippines.
I did not know that.
Apparently. If you're in the Philippines, or you grew up, I need Renee here. One of our ambassador teachers grew up in the Philippines. She can tell me that I'm pronouncing it entirely wrong.
Oh yeah. We're making an effort. That's the important part.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. We're going around the world.
We are, and you know, I was just telling you earlier that after our Romanian introduction, we had a teacher from Romania join us, so it's completely related.
So absolutely.
I like to think so.
I'm encouraging good relations with all countries in the world. Yeah.
Indeed. So we just finished our conference, didn't we? We did our EvaCon Australia Asia and our EvaCon Europe over the last weekend, and that was a lot of fun, wasn't it?
It was a lot of fun, and it's always great when we get our teachers together, even when it's virtually, you know, the people, you know, really kind of buzz off of getting to know one another, and they're really supportive of one another. It's such a good vibe. I love it. Yeah,
it was fun, and it's hard work though. Like, you know, I was getting up at 5 a.m. for the Australia Asia ones, and I was sitting the first morning, like, bleary-eyed vlogging, and I'm like, I hope people turn up. Like, I'm not going to be sitting here on my own for like 7 hours, but it was very well attended. Teachers in Asia and Australia turned up and represented, so
they really appreciated it. One of the teachers was saying to me how much she appreciated it being on their timetable, because although she always tries to attend our online events live, oftentimes it means, you know, staying up till 3-4 a.m. to watch things, and at 3-4 a.m. you don't really feel like you want to volunteer to be a singer or to
I'm sure your neighbours don't want you to volunteer.
Exactly. I was going to say, if you've got anybody else living in the house with you, I'm sure they're not going to be very happy with all that noise going on. So yeah, it did make a difference for teachers to be able to participate a little bit more freely, which is great.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was lovely. Like, for me, I enjoyed it because I get to flip between different classes and see who's there and what they're up to and stuff like that. And I was saying this when we were in the closing, like, it's so wonderful to see people year on year, and you see their evolution and their growth, and not only their own voices, but their teaching, the language they use, the skills that they're developing. And it's so lovely to see that progression of those teachers over the years that have been with us for a while. And then equally in the same foot, to see all the passion of these new people that come in that are excited and they just can't wait to get their teeth into it. Eh?
Absolutely. It is. And like I say, the way everyone supports one another, you know, you'll have one of the teachers volunteering to be a singer in a class, and then the chat box is just full of people going, wow, your voices come on so much, and oh my gosh, that sounds amazing. Just very supportive, which I love.
It is, it's lovely. And then we do, in the closing sessions, we do like prize draws, you know, so we were giving away like books and private lessons and education and stuff like that. And I have to say, the moment during the European closing when we gave away the grand prize, so we gave away 3 grand prizes this year, so like a ticket to EvaCon in Edinburgh and then £100 spending money. And the winner in Mexico, who won at Floor, it was so
it was
awesome.
Lovely.
I know. She was so over the moon. She burst into tears and she's like, I couldn't afford to come, but now I can come. And so she's like ecstatic and cannot wait to come. And I was just like, it absolutely just made my day that we could do that for her.
Yeah, absolutely. It was. That was just like, oh, couldn't have wished for a better winner of that prize, because that was just, amazing.
Yeah. And we also, for the first time ever, we awarded the EvaCon Above and Beyond Award to one of our teachers. And this was something we started doing like almost at the last minute on like day 3 of the conference. We realized Zoom counts like attendance and all the minutes of like people. So we were like, oh wow, like, you know, we've used like 86,000 minutes in like EvaCon America. So like, we were just tracking this, and like I find that fascinating. So we ended up using like 166,000 minutes, collective minutes of Zoom time over That's 8 days of conference. And then we were going to all these people because it registers like, people that come to the classes. And we were like, look at this. This teacher was like 100% attendance for America and like 99% attendance for the other days. And even though that meant like staying up to like 3 a.m, getting up at 5 a.m. and attending classes, she even drove a 4-hour journey with her phone in a little holder watching the classes as she was driving.
You probably shouldn't say that. It's probably illegal, but...
Well, you're just like, it's like listening to a podcast.
I was going to say, let's assume she was just listening to the class and not watching it, shall we?
She was just listening. But just, like, such dedication. Like, I was just, I was having a conversation with somebody after. I was like, I'm blown away that somebody would be so dedicated to something that we spend a lot of time doing. Because I think it's easy for us on the admin business side. We just, we kind of forget. We get stuck in, like, we need to do this, we need to do that. And, like... we just miss that. And so it was a beautiful reminder of just how amazingly dedicated people are to their development.
And how hungry these people are for information, how much they don't want to miss out. There's, a little bit of FOMO, I can't miss that class because I might miss some amazing gems of information that could really help my teaching. I feel that. I'm like, I want to be in as much as possible myself. It doesn't matter how much... I've heard this information before. I want to hear it again because the next time you might get something new from that. You might take away a different gem or someone might explain something in a different way and, it can just spark an idea. You never stop learning, or you shouldn't. You shouldn't ever stop learning because that's when you stagnate and, that's not ideal. We want to keep refreshing our ideas and our thinking. So it doesn't matter how... And I loved being in... So some of the classes I attended just to help answer questions in the chat box for some of our newer teachers. So whilst we had one teacher teaching the class, I'd be there ready to kind of answer questions. And I loved being in those classes as well because, some of the questions that people ask just really make you think, right, actually... this is the answer that I'm going to give you, but I need to look further into this particular topic because I don't know whether I'm satisfied with the answer I've given you. And it pushes you. I love it.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great learning opportunity for those ambassadors that do moderate that chat because they have to be, not only do they have to be careful about the language that they use, but then there's also the language barrier. So they have to then be particular about how they answer questions so that it's not misinterpreted if English is not as strong for the person asking the question. So it's like a learning experience for you as well, as you say.
Absolutely.
And so there's loads of different levels of learning going on. And, I kind of feel like I observe... I learn through osmosis at these conferences. Like I sit down to teach after the conference and something pops up. I'm like, oh, where did that come from? And then you're editing the class, going through it, and then you hear it and you're like, oh, wow, like I must have totally unconsciously absorbed that information and it just flowed out during teaching. So,
Absolutely.
Even while we're working during conference, we're still learning.
You're still taking stuff in. Absolutely.
It's amazing.
It's brilliant. Yeah.
But so, it was a great conference and we really had a lot of fun. Hard work, but a lot of fun, and it was so lovely to see people. But we just can't wait to see everybody next year in person.
Oh, it's going to be so lovely to be in person and just be able to sing together in the same room as one another and, go for a glass of wine after classes together and...
At lunchtime.
Lunch hour or lunchtime. Do all the classes in how to de-swell hungover vocal cords the next day.
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
Yeah, I can't wait. I've put the order in for the weather. Beautiful weather, not too hot, just nice, sunny, dry.
That would be good. Yeah. Fingers crossed that gets delivered on time.
I think we need to do it. Like we're already like inviting guest speakers, thinking about schedule and stuff like that. And I'm like, we need to have like group singing every day in the schedule. Like not just like a choir, because we do the choir, but like group singing, some form of group singing in our schedule every single day to take advantage of the in-personness.
Totally. I think that's a great idea. Yeah.
Can't wait.
Yeah, I know.
It's a great excuse to go shopping for sheet music. Not that I need many excuses to go shopping.
Oh, I love that.
I know. So actually, like before we completely disappear down the conference rabbit hole, we promised people that we were going to have a conversation about pitching and singing last time, didn't we?
We did. Because this is a topic that comes up often, actually, at things like conferences. I got questions this time in the chat box. Well, how do you help a singer that can't sing in tune? Because one of the things that we do when we, and part of our program is how to assess a voice and figure out what that voice needs, and therefore which exercises to choose to best help them. But what if somebody can't do that initial exercise?
Yeah.
What if when you go to put them on that initial exercise to try and assess how their voice is working, all you find is that they cannot match the pitch that you're trying to get them to sing? Then that's a whole other situation. Oh, yeah. And suddenly all of the rules of how to assess the voice and what to do with them kind of go out of the window, because this is just a completely different situation.
I know. And then we've had these questions from teachers, like you say, what happens in a testing situation if this happens? You see like the terror in their eyes. What do I do?
I know, people have asked me that before, and I've said, what you do is you make sure that in your testing situation, you borrow somebody else's student. So you know that you're not getting someone who is in that rudimentary situation. But in the real life situation, especially when you first start out as a voice teacher, a lot of the clients that are going to walk through your door may well have issues with matching pitch.
Yep.
So it's an important topic to discuss and to talk about, and to kind of understand what's going on and what the problems are, because there are a lot of misconceptions around this topic.
So I remember being a younger teacher, and my first student came in that couldn't pitch, and I remember sitting thinking, trying to play the assessment scale, like, uh-oh, well, what do we do now? Because, like you say, we have this logic we work through, and I wasn't experienced enough to know. And so, there began a series of very painful voice lessons for an hour where we would sit and sing like 6 notes on the piano. And because I just didn't know what to do. And it wasn't until a colleague was like, okay, do this, do this, do this. And then suddenly things clicked. But for people that are maybe in that situation, like what do you think are... So let's just rewind, shall we? What are some of the reasons why people struggle with pitch?
Oh, now that is the big money question.
Easy question to start,
and I'm going to have to go, well, exactly. That's like the whole conversation. And this is where misconceptions happen. Because, well, first and foremost, the term tone deaf is a highly inaccurate term, because what that suggests is that there's a problem with the way that someone is hearing the pitch. Mm-hmm. And for the majority of people, that's not actually the issue whatsoever. So there have been lots of studies done where people have done particular training to help them recognize pitch better. So, for example, there was a study done on using micro melodies, so teaching people to recognize pitches between the pitches, so less than a semitone difference in pitch. And what they found after, kind of this sequence of teaching people, at the end, people were far more able to recognize really minute changes in pitch up and down. Really? But their ability to sing in tune was absolutely no different. It was exactly the same as it was to begin with. Because the issue with actually perceiving the pitch accurately is actually a kind of a medical issue. It's what we would call amusia. And depending on where you read your statistics, anywhere between 2.5% to 4% of the population may be amusic. And you can consider amusia as being almost a form of neurodiversity. It just is a brain, the brain is wired slightly differently, and so the brain does not interpret pitch. The thing about amusia, though, is because the brain is not understanding pitch when it hears it, music and melodies kind of don't hold the same value to someone who is amusic as it would to your average person, because for them it's just noise. So whereas we can listen to a piece of music and be like, listen to the harmonies, isn't that beautiful? And a music person would just be like, well, it's just a bunch of sounds. Like, I don't get what the fuss is, right? And because of that, I would say it's incredibly rare to find somebody going for a voice lesson who is actually amusic, because for them, what's the point? They don't get the same buzz. They can't interpret the same emotion and feel from the music. So
even their speaking, isn't it? For people that are music, like they can't even hear the melody of a speaking pitch. It's just monotone to them.
Absolutely. So it's just that inability to really recognise the ups and downs. And for some people, that's more severe than others. And the only thing that I've found study-wise where they've managed to improve that amusia was through kind of stimulation of the brain, electrical stimulation of the brain.
Okay.
And they did, I know, which is rather an extreme way of trying to improve your pitch. So we can almost assume that for the majority of people who come through the door that cannot match pitch, it's not an issue with hearing pitch. Mm-hmm. So, and you can test that out if you're not sure, just sing a low note and a high note and ask them which one is higher, which one's lower. If they can differentiate quite far apart pitches, then they're not amusic. If they're struggling with pitches that are closer together, then they might need a little bit of help to fine-tune that skill, right? So that's less of an issue. That just kind of, we need to just practice this skill a little bit more and it will get a little bit better, right? But because of this, that whole term of tone deaf really paints the wrong picture. And I think it's led people in the wrong direction a lot of the time. So a lot of people who struggle with matching pitch are then led down a route where they are forced to concentrate and listen to pitches and train their ear more. But that's one small part of a big picture, right? So basically, when we have to match pitch, what our brain has to do is it has to understand the tone and the pitch that's coming in to the brain. So there's that process there that's going on where we interpret the pitch. And then we also have to formulate a plan for what the voice has to do. So that's a completely different part of the brain that formulates the motor control of our instrument to make those pitches. We also need a good working memory because we have to memorize what we heard to be able to make a plan for the motor processes. And that's all going on. And as well as all these different processes happening, there has to be communication from one process to the next that is accurate. Otherwise, it becomes like that, telephone game that kids play where, one message goes passed down the line and then by the time you get to the end of the line, it's a completely different story. And actually, from looking at all the research that's been done, it is that passing it down the line that is the most likely cause of somebody's inability to match pitch. Wow. So it's not so much, and although, like I say, if there's an issue with one of these processes, that will impact somebody's ability to match pitch. So if, for example, your vocal production isn't very good, if you've not got a good balance in your voice, that will impact your ability to match pitch. And if you improve that one process, that can make a difference. However, that's one small part of the picture. And so you might find that you get somebody to use their voice really, really well, and they're still not matching pitch. And similarly, if somebody has an issue with memory, so perhaps they've had some kind of brain trauma or something that's affected their memory, that can impact somebody's ability to match pitch. That's one part of a small picture.
Yeah.
So for the majority of people, it's not the independent processes that's the big issue. It's the fact that their brain isn't passing the message accurately from one to the next.
It's a complicated process.
Absolutely it is.
When you break the voice down, because sometimes we get caught up just thinking about what's going on in the larynx or around the larynx. But when you bring in all the neuro stuff, you realize just how complicated it is to actually open your mouth and produce a note. Never mind.
Seriously, the number of things that we have to coordinate to be. It's a wonder anyone can sing in tune. It's
walk
ridiculous. Yeah, exactly. Seriously, and a lot of the research on how to learn this skill. Like, for example, we've spoken before about motor learning and, a lot of that research is done in the fields of sports. And the motor action of, hitting a ball with a bat or kicking a ball with your foot is far less complex than the motor actions involved in producing pitch, because there are so many little components that make up that motor action. So, I always kind of take those kind of motor learning sort of advices with a pinch of salt, knowing that this is more complex than where that research originated from. So although we can probably learn some stuff from it, we also have to acknowledge that sometimes it's not necessarily the whole picture, because there are so many other things involved.
So do you find that, because I've had this conversation with somebody else differently, and in fact we talked a little bit about this with Gerald, about like growing up in a musical environment like a church or musical instruments at school, how that affects your musical development. So do you find that, or is there any research being done about those children that grow up in musical environments like churches or choirs and stuff versus those that don't have kind of musical exposure?
Yeah, there absolutely is. And it is quite stark that if people continue with singing kind of lessons, if they're in an environment where they do music at school and they're singing a lot, they are more likely to grow up to be someone that can match pitch quite well versus someone who doesn't. And you've got to remember, as you're growing up, that's when the brain is making the most new connections. And so if you grow up in a household where nobody sings and you don't go to a church where they sing and your school doesn't really push singing, and therefore you have very little exposure to music and singing growing up, then that kind of connection from one process of the brain to the other is just underutilized. So it's just something that hasn't been used. And the brain is very good. We talk about plasticity of the brain, in that we can kind of rewire certain things, not everything, obviously, but we can rewire certain things, we can learn new ways of doing things, and we can learn new skills. But then there's that old adage, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. And it's just that as we age, it becomes a little bit harder to create these new connections. Not impossible, but a little bit harder. And it takes a little bit more repetition, more hard work. But it is all about repetition. Basically the way neurons work is if the same neuron and the same pathway is being used over and over again, that neuron eventually gets myelinated. So it's kind of like insulated almost. If you think about electrical wires, when you have that plastic insulation around them, the synapses, as they fire and they create these neural pathways, if they keep doing that, the brain will eventually insulate that wire, because it says this is something that happens all the time. Let's just make sure we protect this connection and make it really solid. But if you're not firing that all the time, then you don't have the opportunity to build that up. So it is often the case that when you get somebody in for a lesson who isn't matching pitch very accurately, when you ask them about their history and how much singing they've done growing up, it is often the case that they haven't done an awful lot.
I think that myelination process, is that how we say it? Myelinar?
Myelination. Yeah.
It's a difficult one for Friday afternoon. I do remember reading a book by Joe Spasneskia, I think it was. He talks about that. And it kind of makes me think of that phrase that people always say, like, practice makes perfect, but actually it's more like practice makes permanent, isn't it?
Right. It's just repetition of things. Some people talk about muscle memory. I mean, it's not really a thing, but it's a nice analogy for that process, in that if you do the same thing over and again, exactly. It's much easier to say. But if you think about dancers, for example, the first time you get taught a new dance routine, you have to really concentrate on, my arm goes here on this beat and my leg goes there on that beat. But once they've been through that routine enough times, they're not thinking about what their arms and legs do. They just switch off and off they go, because they have programmed that into their system, right? And so singing, we can think about that in a similar way. But in terms of kind of that connection between the brain, I mean, there are certain things that help that along that us voice teachers can utilize. So one of the things that can help that representation, that ability of the brain to kind of pass the message along more quickly, is when the brain is hearing the pitch delivered in a tonality that is very close to the singer's tonality. So what I mean by that is that if I were to hear another female singer sing me a note, it would be easier for my brain to figure out how to recreate that than if someone were to play the note on the piano, because that is much more similar to what the brain has to set up in terms of the motor commands. And actually, I mean, there's been a lot of research done on that area. Human voices always outperform instruments, and voices of the same genre, not genre, what am I saying? Voices of the same, well, I want to say sex, but it's not even, because it's treble versus bass. So like a young boy whose voice hasn't broken will find it easier to match to an adult female versus an adult male voice. So similar whether it's treble or actually there was one research study done where they used the singer's own voice as the target.
Oh.
So they recorded the singer making some sounds and then played back the recording of that singer's voice singing a particular sound, and that got the most accurate matching because it was exactly their instrument. So the brain found it a lot easier to pass that message on because it understood what that tonality was. So it was an easier connection to make. This is the same as this process. So for a lot of people who are struggling, as you're teaching them, you're going to find that it will be a lot easier for them if, instead of trying to hammer it out on the piano the whole time, if you begin to use your voice. And if you're teaching someone of the opposite sex, if you can get recordings of the opposite sex's voice, call up a friend, use another student, who can record some examples for you so that you can use those to help them pitch off of, that's also going to make that process in their brain a lot easier.
Because we're imitators at heart, aren't we? Like, we grow up learning to imitate our parents, and that's how we learn how to speak and language. And like, I find in my own voice lessons that I have the most success finding the sound the instructor's looking for when I hear them do it, because then I just can imitate and understand. And so that makes a lot of sense when it comes to pitch. If you can hear the same tone or the same timbre in a voice, you can kind of push yourself to the right place and find it. And so I guess that's really important as a teacher then, isn't it? To make sure that your own voice is in a place where you can do this, isn't it?
I mean, and that's right for everything. And that's when we start to kind of look at the topic of like mirror neurons and how those work in the brain.
Exciting.
We go all neuro-geeky on you. But the whole process of mirror neurons is that we can observe somebody doing something and it can have that similar effect. So like some of the research I'm doing at the moment is all on gestures and our interpretation of gestures. And simply watching, for example, if you go and, there are studies done on choirs, so on choral gesture and whatnot, and simply watching the choral instructor round off their mouth as if they were rounding off the vowels, immediately everybody in the choir started doing the same thing with their vowels. So there was no kind of verbal instruction of, I want you to suddenly change your mouth shape. Just literally by doing it, because they're all watching them, they instinctively mimicked what they see. And that works with sound too. So you're absolutely right. An accurate demonstration is more likely to elicit an accurate response from the student.
Isn't that just like, the more we delve into all these topics, like the more we speak to people that come on and guest, and the more learning about the neuro stuff and the psychology and everything goes around it, I still can't help but be amazed by these people that are just, they grow up like the Whitney Houstons, the Mariah Careys, Celine Dion's, and it's like, it's such complicated stuff that just feels like it's so intuitive for them. And it's just like, when you realize how complicated it is, it makes it even more impressive what they can do.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And but then it's also important to know that there's genetics involved.
Yes.
So, some of these people that you've mentioned probably came from a long line of people that were, quite accomplished singers themselves. There's also, exposure to it at an early age. So again, I know Celine Dion, for example, her whole family said, there was a clip going around not that long ago, actually, a really old clip of her with her family on some TV show. I don't know, it was a talent show or something. And the whole family it was like Von Trapp singers going on. So clearly this is something that's been encouraged from, early, and you think about like the Jackson 5 and things, that was like singing as soon as you can breathe, you sing, thank you very much. So that, again, is just developing those connections really quite permanently from an early age.
So then, like, as fascinating as all this is, like, if I'm a teacher and I'm sitting at my piano and I'm just, like, banging my head on the piano because I don't know what to do, which has happened, what are kind of, like, how can I, so, let me phrase this a different way. How can I tell the difference between somebody that comes in and maybe it's a technical issue that's stopping them from producing pitches accurately versus one of the other issues that you mentioned?
That's a great question. So I would, like I say, first thing I would do is just try and establish whether there really is some kind of issue with the hearing, which it almost never is, if ever. I don't think I've ever had anyone where I'm like, no, you can't even hear. The fact that they're there and they're telling you that they struggle to sing in tune means that they can hear that they're off pitch.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to also be constantly listening to, well, what is their vocal production like? If I get them to sing something, comfortably low in their voice, is their vocal production so far off that that's going to impact pitch? And if it is, then I can give them an exercise very quickly to address that. And once they're on that exercise, then I can test out, well, now how accurate are you? If the accuracy improves dramatically, then, okay, maybe that I'll carry on down this path for a little bit longer and, continue to build that ability to maybe get a better vocal cord closure or to, involve a little bit more harmonics in the voice, whatever. If that's working, great. If you can hear that they're getting into a better vocal production, but the pitch accuracy is still really hit and miss, well, then we have to assume it's that passing the message on that's the problem. Yeah. And so that's when we need to start. Well, first of all, we need to be very patient because, as we've just been saying, these are skills that you develop over years growing up. And as a child, it's a lot quicker because your brain is more malleable. It's constantly developing. As an adult, less so. So we have to have a lot of patience because this is not going to be fixed in one lesson. It's not like suddenly we wave a magic wand and they're perfectly in tune for the rest of their life. This is something that's... If only.
Ta-da!
That's it. You're done. I could charge a fortune if that was the case.
Cool. Oh.
Yeah. So it is, and it's something to, make sure that you communicate with your student that this is going to be a long process. And then doing things like we were talking before about making sure that you're using your voice as much as possible. So making sure you are demonstrating in as, close to a tonality as possible is going to be a big help for this. But then the main thing that you can encourage them to do, that is really the only thing that there has been any research on that really truly helps, is to encourage them to create a really solid mental representation of the pitch before they go to try and make the pitch. Okay. So the power of the imagination, essentially. So taking your time, slowing it down, giving them a bit more time to sit there and try and hear it in their head as clearly as they can. Mm-hmm. If they want to visualize it, they can, whatever helps them to really kind of identify this is the pitch that I need to aim for. And slowing down and giving them a significant amount of time to do that before they attempt to sing it is the only thing that really has been shown to make a big impact on that communication, because basically we're just giving the brain longer to pass on the message, and we're trying to keep a solid idea of what the message is the whole time. So by keeping that very clear, hearing it in our heads before we sing it, you'd be surprised how many people don't do that. So for somebody who's very musical, has been doing it a lot of the time, we will hear melodies all the time. We'll be singing to ourselves in our heads and we're hearing the melodies, but a lot of people won't. Wouldn't occur to them. So they may be able to recognize that one note is higher than the other, but they're not really being very specific about what they're aiming for. So they just aim somewhere high or somewhere low. And that's what creates that very kind of inaccurate attempt at that pitch because we're not being specific enough in the brain as to what it is we're trying to sing. So slowing the process down to give the brain time to do this allows the brain the opportunity to figure out how it's done. And so it might take many weeks of being very slow. I actually had a teacher just the other week come to me and say, I've got a student, I don't know what to do with him. He doesn't sing in tune. And she booked him in for a lesson with me so she could sit and watch what I would do with him.
Yeah.
And it was a situation where he wasn't hearing it before he did it. And we needed to slow him down because he was in such a rush to try and sing a whole phrase of a song. And we had to really slow him down. And one of the things that I did with him, which worked really well, was to utilize a song that gets sung in childhood. So we used Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. I actually asked him, I'm like, is there a song that you sung growing up? Something like Happy Birthday or Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star or A Christmas Carol or something. Something that their memory might have a better chance of memorizing because there's been more exposure to it. And we just literally used Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, just very basic. That's it. And that's as far as we spent an hour, basically. That's as far as we got, was singing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. And we varied the keys, but we sung that one little phrase up and down and used it kind of like an exercise. But the exercise was, can you hear that very simple melody? Can you hear that very accurate jump between the notes so that every time you sing, it doesn't matter what note I start you on, you're able to accurately go to those notes. And then, actually, no, it's not true. We didn't just do Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, because I then asked him if he knew a popular song. And bless him, he chose Reach by S Club 7, which I'm not sure if that's a popular song outside of the UK or not.
Maybe,
it was
it's a while ago.
Very cheesy pop song from was it the 90s when they came out with that song?
Oh, making me feel old, Heather. I think it's early 2000s, S Club.
Yeah, so we just took one line from it and we just got him to really concentrate on the jumps between the notes. And the other important factor as a teacher is how we feed back. So in a lot of the studies on, trying to improve people's pitching and just understanding how the brain pitches, one of the main things that helps with more pitch accuracy is how the brain interprets feedback. So there was a study done, for example, where they deliberately fed them back incorrect information. So I don't know, I can't remember whether they had them listening to their own voice, but they manipulated the sound. So what they were hearing back was not actually what was going on. And all of a sudden their pitch matching was all over the place because they were trying to adjust according to what they were hearing themselves doing. So even though the previous note, they might have actually been accurate, because what they heard back was inaccurate, that they assumed they'd gotten that wrong. And so they adjusted their approach for the next note. The way feedback comes is really important. And so if somebody is not really concentrating themselves on their own voice enough to be able to figure out that feedback for themselves, then that's where the teacher becomes really important to make sure you are helping them to recognize the difference between, yes, that was accurate, and no, that wasn't. So rather than let them go on for a long amount of time where it's kind of grey areas, not quite right, but I'll just let them get away with it because it's getting closer, it's actually going to be more beneficial at that point to be very black and white. Yes, that was it. No, that wasn't. Because then that helps their brain to understand their own feedback better.
Yeah. And so, I'm curious then, talking about Twinkle Twinkle, when we're thinking about tools, then do we want to be avoiding maybe intervals that are too large or too close together? Is there kind of a sweet spot for the intervals?
So that's a great question again, and I'm going to go off. So if the issue is an issue of translation in the brain, then larger intervals are going to be easier for them to identify than smaller ones. If it's an issue with vocal production, that might not be the situation, because trying to do an octave jump, for example, might be more demanding vocally. So it will take a little bit of experimentation. But I would say the sorts of intervals that you find in nursery rhymes became popular because they were full of the sort of intervals that the brain could most easily identify.
Okay.
So children's songs, so that interval you hear in Twinkle Twinkle, you hear that in a lot of children's songs. Da 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 da, ba ba black sheep, same as Twinkle Twinkle, because that's quite a nice interval for the brain to kind of, it's close enough together that it doesn't feel like, oh, this is difficult to sing, but it's far enough apart that it's relatively easy to hear that jump.
So the keen-eyed among you that are watching the video might notice that this is a different day from when we first started this episode, because we had some technical difficulties and we had to stop right in the middle of a fantastic question. But luckily, I wrote it down.
Yeah, see, you're very organised, Tom, you are.
Can't find the piece of paper, but I wrote it down. So that's good advice, but then what can the singer do? So, like, I mean, you know, they're at home, they want to practice. They maybe don't quite have the skills yet to hear when they're not on the money. So are you got any tips for singers that they can be more accurate when they're on their own?
So here's one thing. If you're really kind of dedicated and you really want to work hard at it and you're a bit kind of nerdy, geeky about it,
yeah.
One thing that has been shown to help is using spectrograms. So downloading software like Voce Vista, which is a program that a lot of our voice teachers will use to analyze, spectrally analyze voices, can be very useful because they can see for themselves whether they are producing the note that they think they are producing. So they can go, right, okay, they can even, put in a recording of a song that they want to sing, figure out what are the notes here, or if they read music, great, they can see, all right, that's an E. Then when they go to sing it, it will tell them, whether they're on an E or whether actually they're on, a Z, who cares, whatever. They're not there, right? And seeing that, being able to see, well, how far off can give them that visual kind of feedback. But actually, they can even use things like, like the Guitar Hero type video games.
Yeah.
Those sorts of games, because all of those games used to drive me up the wall when I went round to friends' houses to play them, because all that game really does is, when it's on the singing version of it, all it does is matches the accuracy of your pitch against the pitch that is programmed in for that song. So if you start to improvise an alternative melody, you lose points because that's not what's programmed in. No. This is not a game to kind of test your ability to sing and interpret songs and be creative. And that drove me up the wall. The minute you add a riff in, you lose points. But for somebody who's trying to match pitch, that's going to be really, really helpful because, again, they're going to see on the screen how close they are to singing the notes they're supposed to sing in that song. So video games like that can actually, and there's been research on it, have been proven to help people improve their pitching.
Yeah, there's some real fun ear training apps actually that came out in the last couple of years that gamify ear training and tell you when you're off and you're on. And then the one I use, I don't know if it's available anymore, but it would play you to, is this higher or lower? Is this... Right. And then it would do things like that, and then it would train you in the intervals and then test you and give you scores. And it was a lot of fun, actually. Good to get because I'm kind of a visual person, so I like the real-time feedback of, I'm not on the little bar. What do I need to do to get up or down onto that bar? So, I think that can be a lot of fun as well, because you don't want to get stressed about it. You want to keep it fun.
No, absolutely. And we can make it fun. And just to bear in mind that those sorts of games where it's all about hearing, they're great, but it's important for your student to know that that's not the full story. Mm-hmm. So if they spend 30 hours a day training their ear to hear whether it's higher or lower, that won't necessarily make them a more accurate singer. make them more accurate in understanding when they're off. So that's an important factor, but it's not the be all and end all. So they need that ability to see whether they are matching the pitch. And like you say, adding the visual can be really beneficial. Just in general, all of the studies on how people learn, the more modalities that are used at the same time. So adding something kinesthetic, adding something visual, adding something auditory all together in one, kind of group will always be a better way to help someone learn than isolating it into one thing at a time. So just working on it doesn't matter how much you think you're an auditory learner, just doing auditory learning will not be as successful as when you combine it with something else. So adding that ability to kind of listen to themselves on pitch, see it on the screen, to see how accurate they are, that combination can be really powerful.
Yeah, it's a good point and good advice. And I think, because I just remember the first time somebody came into my studio and I was just like, I don't know what to do, because I was like, my whole toolbox went out the window because they couldn't sing the scale. And you're like, you sit there and you get a little panicky because, the person's there, they think you're the expert, you know what you're doing. And you're like, okay, let's just, let's see what happens when we press this key and can you sing it? So
that's it.
I think having some tools in your toolbox for this situation is really important, because
Absolutely.
I would hazard a guess that this is probably more common a scenario in a singing teacher studio than somebody who walks in and can sing through multiple registers of their voice, beautifully blended and balanced,
And particularly if you're just starting out as a voice teacher, I think that makes up almost the majority of your clientele when you're first starting out, because when you first start out, you tend to price your lessons lower. And the sorts of people who are struggling to match pitch tend to kind of value their needs lower. So like, I just need to learn to sing in tune. So I don't need to invest in like the best voice teacher in the world. I just need someone to show me to sing in tune. So they think of it like it's a entry level issue. And so they tend to opt towards going to kind of an entry level teacher. And in actual fact, that issue can be really quite complex and needs, someone who's got some understanding. So it's useful for beginner teachers to understand, what do I do when somebody comes in like this?
Yeah, and just not panic and just, do your best that you can and just do your homework as well.
And like I was saying before, understand that they are starting right at the beginning and they might need some very, very simple things explained to them.
Yeah.
It makes me think about the first time I had a driving lesson. You laugh at me now. First time I had a driving lesson, I got in the car and I sat behind the steering wheel and I'm like, he's like, okay, press this button to start the car up. And then I'm like, but how do I know how far to turn the steering wheel? And he just looked at me like, what do you mean, how far to turn? You just turn it as far. And I'm like, but how do I know how far is the right amount? And I was terrified because I didn't grow up doing those sorts of driving arcade games. I didn't know. And I was a complete beginner. There's something so obviously you just instinctively turn it the right amount to turn the car. I was just like, I don't understand that concept. You need to explain to me how far to turn. And he didn't know how to answer my question because obviously I was the first person who'd ever asked that. But this is the thing. We might get someone in who's like, how do I know how to open my mouth and just sing? Do you know what I mean? It's just one of those, it might be just a very rudimental, I need to understand the basics of how singing occurs.
So, any other last thoughts about pitching then? Now that we've picked your brain dry. Anything left?
I feel like we've covered everything. But all I want to say really is, if you are a voice teacher listening in, just don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to try things out, see what works. And try lots of different approaches and just, find the one that works best for that person. Everybody's unique. What works best for one person isn't necessarily going to be the best approach for another person. So hopefully you've heard a few ideas through this podcast that you can take away and use and just try some things out and see whether anything, really kind of helps that student of yours that is struggling with pitch.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say like these things become part of your toolbox, you know, so you have different toolboxes for different singers that are in front of
That's
you.
it.
And so just spending time practicing your skills doing it and understanding it. And I guess also as well, making sure your own ear is good enough too.
Oh,
you know.
yeah, that helps. Keep
That
working
does
on
help.
yours too. Totally.
Lovely. Well, that was a nice chat. I like doing these
was a
episodes with
nice
just
chat.
me and you.
Well, when they work and we don't have major technical issues in the middle,
difficulties.
that would be better, really. But then
It would not be the Vocal Advancement Podcast without a technical difficulty. Let's face it.
I know.
If things go smooth, I'm like, that'll be a terrible episode.
Well, I hope you were all able to follow along the conversation, even though it was a bit disjointed in the middle there. But yeah. And we've got a guest on our next episode, haven't we?
We do, and it's funny because we're speaking about pitching and musicianship. Our next guest is the delightful Kim Chandler. You know, and we had a lovely chat about all of the musicianship stuff and modals and Lydians and all those lovely things that I can't pronounce.
Yeah, now that is one woman who knows her musicality through and through.
Oh yeah.
And she has a lot of gems to share with us. So yeah,
And
that's going to
she's
be a great episode.
Full of beans, as we say in the UK. If we could just bottle what she's got and sell it.
Her energy, I love it.
I know. Could do with some of that this morning. But yeah, that's a good episode. We had a great chat, and we could have chatted for days with Kim. Honestly, like we probably could do parts 3 through 7 with her. You know, there's so much to cover.
I know. We could. But yeah, so how do people make sure that they don't miss that episode, Tom?
Yeah, so wherever you're listening to this podcast, be it a video or on your podcast player, make sure you have subscribed or clicked follow so that you get notified when that episode comes out. I think it's in August the 10th is when that's due. So that will be lots of fun. And then you can also watch the shenanigans on video on YouTube, on our YouTube channel, Vocal Advancement. So find us there if you want to see what me and Heather look like when we're pulling all these faces, especially when things break. And I'm like,
Spot the difference between the outfits at the beginning of the episode and the end.
I know. Have I got the same hairstyle?
Who knows?
I know. Next time I might have green hair halfway through. That would be interesting.
You should totally do that. I get to see you,
I don't
Tom.
know if I go my glasses, but you know. Maybe. We'll think about it one day. If we get 100,000 subscribers, I'll dye my hair green. There you go.
Oh, now we're talking. Right, get on it, people. Share the word.
What will I let myself in for?
Just going to say, we'll get you all alphabet up, shall we?
Oh, yes. I could do that. Going to see that in a couple of months.
Are you? Amazing.
Yes. Got very good seats. Very good.
Amazing. Love a good show.
Wait.
Love a good show.
I know.
Well,
I know.
thank you all for joining us today. And,
Yes.
And we will see you again soon.
We will. Take care of yourselves, everybody.
Take care,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Bye.